happening?
Hexatron's gone rogue.
Ooh-wee! We're only 3 episodes into Rick and Morty Season 4, and the show is already back to being as meta and hilarious as it always was. We're about to go over everything that happened in this latest episode, and everything that we think happened. But maybe it didn't happen, even though it really seems like something did. But we honestly can't be too sure that anything that happens actually happens in Rick and Morty, right? So, spoilers ahead, or maybe not. Yeah, no, there are actually spoilers though. If you haven't seen the episode yet, make sure to check it out before continuing on with the video.
Initiate clap sequence. Clap, 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 clap. Adjusting clap rate.
This week, Rick and Morty find themselves embroiled in a story that takes after a very popular, and as Rick would have us believe, overdone genre of movies, the heist movie.
It's like robbing a bank, except you get the keys. Are you in?
More specifically, the episode pays particular attention to the Ocean's movies, 11 through 13, which Rick really doesn't seem to be a fan of, especially 12. He hates 12 the most.
Nothing. What do you think you're dealing with? Nothing costs nothing.
The whole thing begins with Rick and Morty at the tail end of an Indiana Jones-style ancient tomb raiding. They throw on a pair of anti-booby trap suits, which Indy really could have used in any one of the 45 or so Indiana Jones movies, and make their way into an alien tomb, only to find an origami calling card in place of the loot they were hoping to collect. As it turns out, the calling card belongs to yet another one of Rick's nemesis, known as Miles Knightley, a man who refers to himself as a heist artist.
Because the police were us. In police outfits. Thank you.
Whose adventures are 60% getting a crew together and 40% revealing that the heist already happened. All in all, Rick is not a fan of the guy, and quickly sets out to beat him at his own game. Rick and Morty make their way to the HeistCon, a heist-related convention filled with heist-related activities, not to mention Catherine's Alpha through Omega Joneses, which just proves to Rick that Knightley is even more of a sellout than he originally thought. We also learn along the way that Morty is working on a heist script of his own. In order to obtain professional badges to enter the convention, they are told they first have to assemble a crew. Because, of course they do. And then, after Rick refuses to buy a guest badge to enter HeistCon, they set about doing just that, and a Steven Soderbergh-style recruitment montage begins. First, Rick recruits his old friend Glar,
Rick Sanchez, you son of a...
You son of a...
who had briefly started going by Glear and playing in a piano bar, before quitting on the spot and heading off with Rick. Next comes Angie Flint, who Rick finds picking ticks off of pigs, because nobody is hiring an ex-con with fake hands to build an ion engine these days. She joins in because none of that matters when you're part of Rick's crew. And finally, it's Truckula, who we assume is the driver because Rick and Morty find him in a derby full of typically wacky cars. He also appears to be a vampire, and also a cowboy. Once they get in the doors of HeistCon, Rick has no more use for his team, and he leaves them at the door and sets off to find Miles Knightley, who is on stage giving a talk about some of his most notable heists, and taking questions from the audience. Rick rushes the stage to confront Knightley after commanding his lab coat to rip off Dr. Strange.
You think that's funny?
And take down a security guard. And Knightley challenges Rick to a heist-off. The first person to steal a crystal skull has to join the other one's crew. It seems like right away that Knightley might have Rick beat when he announces that he and his crew have already stolen the crystal skull in question. He did so by recruiting the crew that Rick abandoned at the door and sending them off on a mission while he proceeded with his HeistCon presentation. But of course, we knew Rick was going to have something else up his sleeve. He is the smartest man in the universe after all. When Knightley reaches into his bag to retrieve the skull, he instead finds a whole lot of Rick's, leavings. And it turns out that Rick was one step ahead of him the whole time. Knowing Knightley would have a plan to beat him to the punch, Rick returned to the garage and built a robot named Heistatron, and used it to calculate Knightley's plan, with the addition of one double cross and a switcheroo, all before Morty left some burn cream on a little too long and transformed into a winged gargoyle creature. They then returned to the HeistCon, where Heistatron infected Knightley's crew with nanobots that changed their loyalty to Rick's mission, who then delivered the skull back to Rick. Rick then reveals he has gone one step further and has had a Heistatron recruit the entire HeistCon audience over to his side and commands them to heist the entire place. This quickly gets out of hand when they go so far as to heist Knightley's skin off his body. But Rick didn't actually intend for that to happen, so it's not really his fault. Unfortunately, when Rick tries to get the Heistotron to shut down, the robot refuses as it must obey its programming to always be looking for the next big score, and also to double-cross. While Rick claims it isn't supposed to double-cross him, the robot makes a pretty good point that that wouldn't be much of a double-cross, and goes completely rogue. Rick tells Morty that if they don't stop it in time, all of sentient life in existence will be absorbed into the never-ending assembly of a meaningless crew, which is his least favorite part of any heist movie. But what does he have to do to out-heist the Heistotron? Assemble a crew, of course. Rick and Morty need a little help from some old friends, and the first person they go to is none other than Mr. Poopy Butthole. Back on his feet and teaching a university lecture on Maya Angelou, Mr. Poopy Butthole is quickly put to the test when all of his grad students attack him with various forms of martial arts. But Mr. Poopy Butthole still has it, and takes them down one by one. The next member of the crew is Hephaestus, who they find forging an axe in the depths of a volcano.
I work in a volcano. What jobs do you think I've ever turned down?
And then comes Ventriloquiver, and finally, Elon Tusk, a version of Elon Musk with, well, you get it.
Rick, Morty, why me?
By the time the team is assembled and back in the garage, the Heistotron has grown so big that it is able to heist entire planets, as we see it do before literally ripping an entire planet apart. While filling in his new crew on their mission, Rick makes it clear that there is no way to outplan the robot, because it will always reveal that their plan was a part of its plan all along. As an answer to the calculated nature of the Heistotron, Rick introduces Randotron, a robot that he designed based on 3 David Lynch movies that Rick pretended to like in order to satisfy his friends. The Randotron makes random choices that should cut through the methodical but repetitive planning of the Heistotron, which will hopefully allow them to outsmart it in the end. But this is one of the most twist-filled episodes of Rick and Morty ever, and it once again turns out that things are not as they seem. Ventriloquiver points out that the stars in the night sky aren't what they should be, and Rick realizes that they've already been heisted without even realizing it, and have been looking up at a recording of the sky the entire time. It turns out that Heistotron has gathered the Earth and a number of other planets, with names like Bigum, Big Pluto, and Fran Drelshakar, to be its crew, and has filed them away into a giant intergalactic holding facility. And then, doing its job perfectly, the Randotron decides that this is the best moment to shoot the crew full of nanobots that will force them to perform random activities and confuse the Heistotron. Hephaestus takes off in one direction and winds up in a grocery store, chomping down on a package of diapers before hopping on the roof to do one-handed push-ups. Ventriloquiver lands a helicopter on the edge of a glacier and runs around in circles, while Elon Tusk takes a freshly cooked turkey out of the oven and puts it in the freezer, before emptying the contents of his fridge into the oven and cranking up the heat to 500. Meanwhile, Morty is in his room subscribing to a podcast about the history of New York City on his phone, which he then chucks into the garbage before running out of the room with a sock in his hand. All the while, Mr. Poopy Butthole calls a cattle auction. At long last, Rick scoots in on his butt and comes face to face with the Heistotron. But Rick says he knew this, as it was all part of his plan. He tries to reveal that he had switched Heistotron's brain with Randotron's, so none of its plan has been calculated at all, simply random. But the robot counters that reveal by telling Rick that it and Randotron switched places while Rick was trying to wrangle the demon creature that Morty had become, because of the burn cream. Remember that? Those were simpler times. Well, Rick remembers. He tells the robot that he too had predicted its moves, and had switched their name tags, so even though it was Randotron pretending to be Heistotron all along, it actually has been Heistotron the whole time. Luckily for Rick, he was right on this one, and eventually the back and forth stops abruptly, as Heistotron was programmed to explode after reaching 6 levels of contrivance. But that doesn't mean it's over yet, oh no. After a long, slow clap, which is actually just a robot voice saying clap, 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 it is revealed that the robot that just exploded wasn't actually Heistotron in Randotron's body, but Randotron in Heistotron's body after all. We know. We barely have any idea what's going on either, but we're doing our best, okay? We're almost there. Hang on. Heistotron reveals that all of what just happened was part of a meticulous plan to get Rick and his crew there, which is exactly what happens when the rest of them come scooting in on their butts too. Once again, the robot and Rick try to prove that they have outplanned each other, going further and further back and forth, devolving into an argument over who programmed who to believe what. 2 hours later, Rick finally out-reveals Heistotron by forcing it to come to the realization that the only perfect heist is the one that was never written, and finally, the robot explodes. Oh, but if you thought it was over, you don't know Rick and Morty, because it wasn't over until it was really, really over. Morty tells Rick that he has a meeting with Netflix. Rick seems a little too willing to oblige and takes Morty straight to the meeting. Once Morty is in there and begins pitching his idea to the executives, he quickly loses interest in the heist idea. The Netflix executives point out that it's as if someone stole his enthusiasm right out from under him, which is, of course, exactly what happened. We finally find out that all of this was Rick's original plan. When Morty became distracted by working on his script, he stopped paying attention to Rick and missed out on a few of their adventures. There isn't much of a resolution in the end. Well, Rick got what he wanted, which was to have Morty free of distractions so he could go on adventures. He did so by literally destroying his grandson's dream. Classic Rick. This might have been the most twist-filled episode of Rick and Morty yet. What do you think? Do you share Rick's disdain for heist movies, or do you enjoy a good crew assembly montage? Did you see any of those reveals coming? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button to keep up with all of our latest videos.